There's a lot more that goes into writing code than just the writing of code. Tests need to test, security checks need to check, and linters need to, lint. We want all of this to be automated so the developers don't need to think about it. Let's see how this is done. Today we're joined by Jessica. Jess, thank you so very much for being here.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Let's kind of start with probably the most logical place to start, which is what is automation? Why is it important? What is GitHub Actions? There's a lot there. Find a question you like and let's start there.
That's a lot to unpack, but ultimately automation, especially in terms of software delivery and engineering, is the concept of how can we automate some of these more manual tasks, some of these more human tasks that maybe could be prone to error if we were to have to do them regularly. And so Actions, for example, from GitHub is our way of trying to do that automation in a more automated, obviously, to continue to be redundant kind of fashion. It ties into DevOps and the concepts of CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous delivery, or deployment. And I don't know if we've ever level set on the concept of DevOps as a whole, but the definition of DevOps is it's the union of people, process, and products to enable the continuous delivery of value to end users. And so that's going to be key when we're talking about actions or any kind of automation, because the end goal for every developer is not to deliver code or new features or just ship as fast as possible. It's to be very intentional where you want to deliver value to your end users. And one of the best ways we can do that is through systematic automation using something like GitHub Actions with a set of defined tasks to handle that software delivery process.
I think of a lot of scenarios where we're going to want some level of automation, obviously like testing and linting and deployment.
Yep.
But one thing that I'm going to worry about though is, am I going to have to write all of that manually? Hello? Oh wow, it's Brittany Ehrlich. Let me put you on speakerphone.
The reason you don't have to worry about that is because there's something called the GitHub Actions Marketplace, which is our central hub for a bunch of automation tools that have been custom built to work with GitHub Actions.
Okay.
There's a diverse ecosystem that includes everything from CI/CD tooling to reporting tools to AI tools that you can work with. That makes it so that you don't have to write everything manually. You can just use the tools that are already existing. You can also build and publish your own tools if you need to.
How do I make sure then that the actions I'm using from the marketplace are the ones I'm expecting to use?
That's a great question. Coming soon, the GA for Immutable Actions is going to be out, which is going to be a change to storing actions on packages on the GitHub Container Registry. That means that you're going to be able to reference a specific immutable version of an action instead of using the commit SHA or the past versions that we've used. The whole idea here is it's going to strengthen the CI/CD supply chain and make it more secure.
Thanks for sharing, Brittany. So with all of those different actions, how do I make sure that they run when I expect them to run? Because I'm thinking like, hey, if we're going to have tests, I want to make sure that those pass before we start merging into our main branch. How do I ensure that that happens?
So there's a few different ways. First off, when you start defining your set of steps and everything in what we call a workflow file or your actions workflow file, you can define at the top of your workflow file how you want this to set off a chain of events, so to speak. So you can say on push into main or have a list of different branches. Maybe you're using feature branches. You can do it on pull requests. But obviously you don't maybe want certain changes, especially going ultimately out into production, to happen on main every single time unless key things have happened. You want to make sure that your functional tests have passed, that your unit tests have passed, linting, tests, security checks, policy as code, all of those. And then on top of that, not only can you protect your branch and then set push rules. When you ultimately get out into your deployment environments, you can also set deployment gates and require manual approvals there, which is very important for highly regulated industries, government, healthcare, finance, those things, especially where you need to have some compliance and audit control.
When I stop and think about, like, let's just take unit testing as my example here, I'm going to want that pretty consistently throughout, the entire enterprise. Does that mean now that I'm going to have to rewrite that action over and over and over again, like internally? Like, I know that we have the marketplace, but even then, I'm still going to have to create some sort of a workflow file that's going to use that. How do I make sure I'm not having to have like script sprawl and have all of those repeated throughout my entire, organization?
Right. Well, your first question is is am I going to have to? I mean, if you really want to and you want to put yourself through that entire painful process, you are more than welcome. However, that would not be a best practice. That would not be advisable. We're seeing that customers now want this set of like a golden standard, right? We want to have maybe a more central place where I want to make sure that all of my projects for all my organizations have a certain set of steps, but also a certain set of information, guidelines, standards, policies. To do that, you can use something that's called reusable workflows, and it follows the DRY principle or the don't repeat yourself principle. You can actually keep those workflows or those actions in a central repository along with other things that might apply for your deployment, things like your infrastructure as code, for example, bicep files, Terraform files, CloudFormation, doesn't matter, whatever. You put it in a central repository and then your teams have access to that repository to call those workflows. And what's really cool is as you're defining those reusable workflows, you can have inputs. So you can pass information back and forth. You can be able to target different environments and everything where you're passing even variables for pull requests, for branches, for tags. They're completely customizable to where you can tailor it to your needs. And then now let's take like a simple example. You have your front end, your back end, your middleware. All of those teams can have the same linting and testing and even security policy reports all across the board and have the same exact process because they're following that reusable workflow, and it's guaranteed to work the same every time and produce the same information that the developer and teams will be able to receive.
When I'm thinking about those workflows, how do I make sure that all of that's done securely? Like, how do I protect those passwords? How do I make sure that an action's only able to do what I expect it to do and only in the places where I expect it to do it?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the beautiful things about how actions work is it is very declarative, right? You are defining it in a workflow file, but in terms specifically of where you're deploying it to a cloud, whether that's Azure, whether that's Google, whether that's AWS, you have to have some sort of trust relationship with that cloud to handle that deployment. Now, previously back in the day when we didn't care as much about our friends as we do now, we would allow them to use passwords and secrets, but we're all friends here. We don't do that anymore. Now the recommended way would be to use something like OIDC or OpenID Connect, where you're actually creating a trust relationship between GitHub Actions and your repo or your org and the cloud provider. Basically what it's doing is when it's authenticating to that cloud, it's grabbing a temporary credential that has access for key details. So for example, if I'm pushing on a feature branch, I have the ability, if I've given it explicit permission as part of that trust relationship, I have the ability to say for feature branch, I'm allowed. But if I'm on Apple branch, I can't pull it. Right. If I'm on main, I can pull it. You can define that accordingly. You can also do it per tag, per environment, per pull request. You can set the rules accordingly. And then when your actions workflow is firing off and it's going and making that authentication, you can see in the logs actually where it's saying, I'm going out to X cloud. I'm going to use a federated identity. I'm going to pull that temporary credential where I can run the commands for this job only, and then it discards it automatically at the end. There's no cleanup needed. There's no removing any kind of cache. That credential is only used for that session.
So after all of those workflows run, how do I actually know that they ran? How do I know what they did? And especially like I'm thinking about like a regulated industry where I need to be able to demonstrate, hey, this took place. How can I do that?
Right. There's a few different ways. Probably the easiest way and the way that most people would think of is I could just go into the logs, right? Actions UI has the ability where we can go and take a look at the jobs and the steps and comb through it. But honestly, if you want to comb through thousands of lines of logs, you're probably the same person that maybe enjoys writing the thousands of lint tests, same repeated workflows. No one has time for that, especially when we're in this agile, fast-moving industry. A better way would be to use something called Job Summaries, which is built right into Actions. You can output any kind of data, whether that's your code coverage, your unit test results, job summaries that you want to define. Ultimately, it's just in Markdown and text. We've done it before. We've seen customers do it with even prompt flow and promptd, like when they're running their evaluations on their AI models. Any type of information that you think would be valuable, you can output out. You can do it also on conditional statements. So like if this is a failure, if this job is canceled, if it's a success, you have complete control over that. And what's really cool is then you can tie that in to the DRY principle of reusable workflows. Now you're amplifying and you're stepping up the game of those reusable workflows you're giving to your entire org or to your teams, and you're standardizing across, for the example we used, front end, back end, whomever. Now when they run their unit test or their lint test or functional test or whatever information, even their deployments, every team is going to get the same output of job summaries. We've talked about highly regulated industries. So for example, if you're using provenance and SBOMs, all of that can also get outputted to your job summaries. And now you're just giving a very visual, easy place at the end of your workflow running to see all the information about your build, deployment, and release.
Thank you so very much for being here today, Jessica, and sharing all of this wonderful knowledge.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Christopher.
What really stuck out to me about that conversation is the overall importance of automation. There's a lot more to writing code than just writing code. We need to make sure that it gets to where it needs to be in the exact state that it needs to be in. And ensuring that that happens behind the scenes without our developers having to go in and perform separate steps is going to help keep them in the zone and ensure that all of that properly takes place. To learn more about automation and GitHub Actions, check out the link. And thanks for joining as we went beyond the commit.